the previous time we were explaining how if you put ABCD, it's gonna go for every character. It's gonna ask. It's gonna go through scope again. That didn't say anywhere.
No, it does not. So as long as your submission is not conflicting with what I specify here, you'll be okay.
I just have it where it just shows one time, and if it press like a negative number, it'll still show.
A negative number is fine because a negative number is permissible, right?
I thought it was 0 and anything from 0 and above.
Nope.
No, you can't have negative. You can't have negative.
Well, we'll do it today, so we'll find out.
You can't have like negative amount.
Oh, number of entries, no. And threshold, no either. But the entries can be negative.
See, I thought that wasn't supposed to be negative.
All right. Well, we're gonna start today's class. We got one more homework assignment related to the current one. I don't think this one is going to be nearly as hard because I'll give you the solution of the current homework assignment, and you can start with that and work on the second or the next homework assignment. Yes?
Are you recording?
It should be because I set it up to a. I have a time release kind of thing, so it should be recording right now. Yep, it is.
Very nice.
But good to check. Thank you. I don't mind the reminders. All right. All right. So, you guys ready?
Yes.
Okay. So let's go ahead and look at this homework assignment first, and I'll give you the solution to this one, and then we'll start on the next one. Okay. So for this particular homework assignment, you have to write a program in a folder called sum, and the source code of the program has to be called main.cpp. So those are all kind of spelled out here, and we are gonna do exactly that. Okay. So we'll go ahead and create a folder called sum, and inside the folder sum we'll create main.cpp, which is the name of the program, the source code. The program has to do the following. It has to prompt user to enter a maximum number of entries, and I want the prompt to be max pound entries. So let's go ahead and do that. And for this homework assignment, you are supposed to use scanf and printf. So what do I need to include to get those particular functions to work? stdio.h. Okay, the standard input-output header file. Okay, so once you have that, you can start with your main subroutine. And this is the way I write my programs. I always open the curly brace and then right away close the curly brace so that I don't have to worry about the indentation or did I close it later on. It's just a habit that I have developed over the years that seem to work for me. Now, whether it works for you or not is entirely up to you. I mean, it doesn't work for maybe it doesn't work for some people, but it does work really well for me, and that's why I do it. Okay, so I want to prompt the user first. So let's go ahead and just say printf, make it the prompt, which is max pound entries, and then we'll have the user to enter the number of entries. So what do I use to take that number and store that number into a variable? Scanf. Okay. So as soon as you type scanf, and by the way, what do I use for formatting here? Percent D. Okay, so that will be fine. Did anyone use hexadecimal like a %x? Since I did not specify base 10, in the original program, it will still be okay. Okay. So, but once I specify scanf, I understand. Oh, right away, I know I need a variable, because unlike printf, which you can just print something without a variable, scanf always need a place to store the value. So that means I need a place to store the number of entries in this particular case. So right away, I need a variable to store that. So you can either name it, you can name it any way you want. Okay, I just name it maximum number of entries or max entries. And then I specify the ampersand, which is the address of max entries, because scanf needs to know where the variable is in order to store the value into the variable. In this case, error checking is not needed because it's not one of the entries. Okay, so I don't do error checking here. It's not necessary. If you do it, it's not a problem. Okay, if you do all the error checking here, it's not an issue. And then I ask for the threshold, and right away I know that I need another variable to store the threshold. So I say int threshold and do a scanf here. And once again, error checking is also not necessary here. If you put it here, it's not a problem, but you don't need it here.
For the homework?
For the homework.
So we did.
Well, if you use a subroutine to do to read a number and do error checking, then it doesn't really. It's not any more complicated, right? You're just calling the same subroutine again and again. All right, so that will take care of the first one. The third line says, using error checking logic, let a user enter base 10 signed numbers until at least one of the following conditions is true. So one of the conditions being the maximum number of entries is reached. Okay, someone has entered exactly the same number of entries that has been previously specified, or the sum of the entered numbers has reached the threshold. Okay, so those are the two conditions where we can get out. And okay, so right away I kind of know that I need a third variable, don't I? Because otherwise I cannot know what am I comparing to the threshold. So I need to compare the sum, and I need a variable to store the sum. So going back to the code here, I need a third variable here, which is my summation. And the summation should be initialized to 0 first, because otherwise it starts with an unknown value. Every variable in C and C++ starts with a value. The question is, do you know what it is? Okay. In other programming languages, especially with interpreted languages like Perl, PHP, and so on, when you declare a variable, they all start with a particular value. Okay, depending on the programming language itself. But in C and C++, it starts with an integer value, but I have no idea what it is. And that's why it is really, really important to initialize your local variable as well as your global variables. All right, so what do I need here? What kind of control structure do I need? We need a loop. Okay, so you can either use a for or a while. I'm going to use a for because, as I was grading question 3 of exam 1, quite a few people, in the trace, I could see that it was not very clear, these people, whether they understand how a for loop works or not. So I'm going to use this opportunity to use a for loop to basically illustrate the components of a for loop and how to use it at this point. So I'm going to use a template for a for loop. Let me bring it up here and basically say, okay, now these are the components. Okay, the question now is, what do we put here? Before the first semicolon within the parentheses, what is that chunk of code specifying? What are those expressions specifying? Initialization, right? So that means sum equals to 0 could go in there. I mean, sum equals 0 can be here because that's the initialization. It is done before the repetition. Okay, it's only done one time before we enter the loop. Yep.
Are you going to be validating just the max entries and threshold in here?
I'll be doing that. Yes.
Okay, because I was just thinking like.
Not so validating. I'm checking.
Put a counter in there, but that's going to be for the second.
There are several ways to do this. You can also decrement max entries until it gets to 0.
Yeah. Reverse logic.
So if you want to count up, we can certainly do that. So we can say, entry counter. So if you use an entry counter to count the number of entries we have done so far, then you also have to do the initialization. And even though we can put it before, like you can have 2 additional lines before line 13 at this point, it is usually better to put it inside the for loop itself, because that particular portion inside the for loop is dedicated for the initialization of variables related to the loop. Okay, so it kind of gives you a context and say, oh, these things or these variables are related to the loop itself. Maybe we need to use these things also in the condition as well as the body of the loop. So that's why it is nice to have a for loop in addition to a while loop, because in the while loop, things are all kind of scattered around and you don't necessarily see the connection between the components. So right here, it is kind of clear that sum is related to the loop, and entry counter is also related to the loop. What do I put here? What does this component specify in a for loop?
You're gonna compare with the max number of entries.
Well, okay, that's true. That's specifically what we want to do in this particular program. But in general, this component in a for loop means what? What is the meaning of this component?
Condition.
It's the condition. Now, is it a condition to get out of the loop, or is it a condition to stay in the loop?
Stay in the loop.
Condition to stay in the loop. Okay, so we want to stay in the loop when. Okay, so I'm gonna do it like this. Okay. Okay. So I'm giving myself some placeholders here. I know one portion has to do with sum, and the other portion has to do with entry counter, right? Because according to the description of the homework assignment, number of entry, the maximum number of entries is reached. That has to do with entry counter. When the sum has reached the threshold, that has to do with the sum. So I know that we have two separate comparisons, and they have to be combined into one single condition using some sort of logical operator. So I'm leaving these placeholders here just so that I know I have to figure out these things, but I just want to do it one step at a time. Okay, what do we do with sum? What do we compare sum to? The threshold? Okay, so I'm going to say, we compare sum to threshold in a particular way. And I'm going to open up a new line just so that it's easier to see. Okay, there we go. What do we compare entry counter to? Number of entries, maximum number of entries. So max entries in my program. Okay, so now I have all the individual components, but I have to specify the comparison operators as well as the logical operator to combine the two comparisons into one single Boolean value. All right, so we know that if this condition is true, we stay in the loop. So if we want to stay in the loop, how do we want sum to relate to threshold?
Less than.
Has to be less than and not less than or equal to, okay? Because the logic here specifies exactly that we want to until, which means this is specifying the exit condition. The exit condition is when the sum is greater than or equal to the threshold. So the negation of that is less than and not less than or equal to. Okay, so let's look at the other portion. What about entry counter and max entries? How should they relate in order for me to stay in the loop? That part depends on how you initialize entry counter. If you initialize entry counter to 0, this has to be less than and not less than or equal to. Okay, because we start counting from 0. If you start counting from 1, then it becomes less than or equal to 1. Less than or equal to max entries. So this part depends on how you initialize entry counter. The way I do it here, because I start counting from 0, I have to make sure that this is actually less than, because by the time entry counter has the same value as max entries, that means I have max entries plus 1 entries that I have already taken in. All right, what about this mysterious part here? How do we combine these two comparisons into one single logical or Boolean value? Or really? Yep, we want it to be an AND, because if one of these conditions fails, I'm getting out of this loop. Okay? Right, so if that part is okay, we'll move on. And the last part of a while loop inside the parentheses, what does that part specify? It specifies post operation, okay? And that is done after the body of the loop executes, okay? This is the one part that many people have problems with. From question 3 of exam 1, I could tell that many people think that this will be done at the beginning of each iteration, is actually the opposite. It is done at the end of each iteration, not at the beginning. Okay, so you have to kind of remember that part. Yep.
So just to reiterate, post operation after the body is formed.
Correct. So in other words, if I specify a block of code here, I just call it block 1. This part here is done after block 1, not before. So after block 1, it will execute the post operation, then it will go back and reevaluate the condition. So this is the post operation. Out of sum and entry counter, is there anything I should do on a per iteration basis after the block it has executed? Entry counter should be incremented by 1. Sum should be increased by a certain amount, but that amount is not specified here, so I cannot, I'm not going to put it here. All right. So inside here, this is a good time to copy and paste from my code, right? Remember on Monday, we talked about how to do the error checking and all that stuff. So this is the place to copy and paste a good chunk of that code into here. Well, I'm not going to do any copy and pasting, because it takes me more time to copy and paste than to rewrite it from here. So I'm just going to say number of entries here, or the number that I'm reading. So the first thing I want to do is to do a scanf. And scanf returns a 0 if I cannot read a number, and it returns a 1 when I successfully read a number. If it's not successful, I want to keep reading it again. So once again, we have a loop. So now we say, while I cannot read a number in base 10 into num as the variable here, I want to do the following. What I want to do is I will basically say, okay, we got some junk character here. Depending on whether you want to implement the error message, if you want to implement error message, which is okay, you can say error counter, okay, and we can initialize error counter to 0 here, and then we basically say let's go ahead and clear 1 byte at a time, 1 character at a time, until we can actually read the next number. And the way we clear a single number or clear a single byte is just to declare a char, which is also int 8_t. They mean exactly the same thing. So we have a char here that we call junk, or if I want to be consistent with my own notes, it is int 8_t. And to use that as a name, we have to include another include file. It is called standard integer.h. It's a header file that defines int blah blah _t, and also uint for unsigned integer _t. All right, so the only purpose of this particular junk character is so that we can read a single byte, a single character into junk, and then guess what? Throw it away. We're not going to do anything with it. But we do want to check error counter, because if error counter is in fact 0, we want to do the following. We just print an error message and say, give me a number, exclamation point, my feed, like so. And after that, I want to increment error counter. So instead of having an increment somewhere else, I can just do it here too. Okay, I can do a post increment, not a pre-increment. Doing a post increment means the first time I get to line 24, the value that I'll be comparing to 0 will be 0, because I am using the value of error counter before the increment for the comparison, and then it is incremented to 1, from 0 to 1. So this will still work. Okay. So I'm thinking this should work at this point. The error checking code should be working. And then the next thing I'm going to do is to say, okay, at this point on line 28, I know that I have just successfully read a number into my variable num here. So what am I going to do? What am I going to do with it? Add it to sum, right? Okay. So you can say, sum plus equal to num, or I can say sum equals sum plus num. Either way works just fine. So you don't have to use a particular way. It's up to you to decide which one you want to use. I just like to use this one. All right. That's pretty much the program. Okay. That's pretty much the entire program. except after the loop here, I'm getting out either because the sum has reached the threshold, or I have entered enough entries, based on max entries. So it's a good time to print the summation itself. So we just say printf %d, just give me the sum. There's no need to prompt anything or to say this is the sum of all the numbers. Just print the number out, and we're all done. Any questions about this?
So when you have the post entry counter, if I actually don't do it, then I do it at the end. Should I not use the post, but I'm using
Pre.
pre?
You mean on line 15?
Yeah, on like 15. And when I'm
It doesn't matter which one you use, because nobody cares about the value of the expression. All we really care is we are adding one to the variable. So in that particular case, on line 15, you can use pre-increment, you can use post-increment, it doesn't make any difference. Yep. Yep, you're next.
Whenever you say printf, don't you have to put the bar n at the end?
What? Sorry?
The
percent
backslash
bar.
n, the backslash.
Yeah, it would be nice to have that. Otherwise,
What is that for?
It's line feed. It's basically a \n is like opening a new line. So this is just opening a new line so that the prompt, when we come back to the prompt, it won't be right next to the number itself.
So you don't have to do it then.
You don't have to do it.
Okay, that was pretty much my same question.
Okay. Sorry?
You have to do it this case, but you can actually tell us to do it.
Oh, I did. Print all the sum and entries and a line feed at the end of the line. Okay, sorry, I did not read my own instruction carefully. There we go. Thank you.
Yeah, 40% off. 40%
Yeah.
off.
40% off.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, so this time it's not I who say 40% off for not having the line feed. You know who said it, right? It's all recorded. Yep.
I had a question. In my homework, besides, when you enter the entry,
Mm-hmm.
I added just entry, whatever you entered, accepted. Is that fine with the homework?
It's
So-
not conflicting with.
It's not conflicting
It's
with
not
the
conflicting
logic.
with the instruction here, so I will take it.
It's just easier for me to understand when to put what
Okay.
into the program. So if that's fine,
Yeah.
it should be okay.
What does that mean? A line feed at the end of the line, character term. Or-
\n.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Like a space.
\n. Not like a space.
No, like to go to the next line.
To move on to the next line, yes.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Yep. Well, you said the space.
Different logic.
A space is not a line feed. Any other questions? Any questions? Yep, go ahead.
Can you do this homework using while loop instead of for?
That's fine. Whatever loop structure you want to
Show
use.
us that step.
Oh, how to use a while?
Yeah.
Okay, I can do that. Let me see if there are other questions first. Okay. Nope. No other
Alright.
question. Go ahead.
Mine I use an array. You know, you can use array for this.
You don't need to use an array because you're processing the numbers, as you're reading them. Because we are not sorting, we're not trying to do anything fancy. We're just kind of doing
Well,
a
I just
summation.
put to the elements for each individual, like depends on however much they want, and then add them up at the end.
Okay,
Yeah.
but if you use arrays, then there's a potential problem because what if max entries is exceeding the size of your array?
No, it's in a for loop, so it counts it, and then it'll end. Wanna come try it?
Okay, I will, when I grade it, I will see it. But
I'll talk to you.
but there's no need to use an array in this case at all. Yep.
Were we not supposed to do it if the threshold was negative?
Well, I did not specify whether threshold can be negative or not. So you can specify a threshold of a negative number, but if you do that, that means it won't ask you for a single number. That would be the proper behavior of the program. Is if you specify a negative maximum number of entries, or a negative threshold, it won't ask you for a single entry because the conditions will fail the first time, right? Because if threshold is negative and sum is initialized to 0 to begin with, then this condition is automatically false, right? And the same thing applies to entry counter versus max entries. If max entries is negative and entry counter itself is initialized to either 0 or 1, then that condition will also fail the first time. So that won't. So it's okay to use negative numbers. It's just that when you use negative numbers for threshold or max entries, then the program should not prompt you for anything.
So will I get marked down if I build it so that the threshold could be negative and not the max entries?
They won't be marked down.
Okay.
Yep. All right. So to get back to your question, how to do it is using a while instead of a for. The way you do it with a while is you extract this to outside of the while loop, and then you put this all the way to the end of the body of the loop, and then you keep the condition just the way it is. Okay. So I can basically just use comments here to indicate exactly how to do it in the while loop. So if you want to do it as a while loop, you do the initialization before, and you can either use the same format as I usually used before, or you can use 2 individual statements in this case, and then you specify while, but the while condition is going to be it's going to have the same condition as this part here. So we say copy, and then we paste. Oops. And then the last one here, the post operation, you have to specify all the way to the end of the block here. Now, in this particular case, whether you put in the increment of entry counter all the way to the end does not really matter. But that's where it should go if you want to make the while loop equivalent to the for loop. So is that kind of answering your question?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay. A for loop is kind of like a shorthand of a while loop, but the nice thing about a for loop is it makes it visible, makes it kind of clear what variables are related to the loop, and those needs to be initialized in the for loop, and the conditions should involve one or more of those variables. Right, so now it is a good time to test the program. So we say G++ dash warn all dash pedantic dash O2 for optimization, because this is the only way to trigger the data flow analysis to make sure that you use a variable only after it is initialized. Without the dash O2, it doesn't trigger the flow analysis of the compiler, and it may not be able to catch some of the errors. So this is good for error checking. Then we specify dash G for debug, dash O to specify the name of the executable. Main.cpp goes here. Wow, I am impressed. It doesn't have a single mistake, at least not syntax mistake. I mean, most of the time I have the typo somewhere here and there. It's fairly common. Maximum number of entries. Let's try negative number first. Okay, so let's try -1 and threshold to be -2, and you can see that it just prints the sum is 0. It doesn't let me type anything into it because the conditions are false to begin with. Okay. So this time let's try something else. We can specify like up to 5 entries, and the threshold is, let's say, 10. Okay, so we'll enter 2 numbers. Let's say we enter 6 and 7. So the total after 7 is 13, and 13 is exceeding the threshold already, and it should print 13 and get out of the loop. Get out of the loop and then print 13, and that's exactly what it did. We can now specify 3 entries, and then 100 as the threshold. And the first entry is 1, the second one is 2, the third one is 3. So at this time, this is my 3rd entry already. So right after I press the enter key, it should get out of the loop because now we have 3 entries, and then the sum of these 3 entries should be 6. And that's what it does. So any questions about what the program is supposed to do?
I didn't think you were actually supposed to let the program take the negative numbers and then print 0 zero, I actually have it where it goes into a loop and tells you you can't have negative numbers. So you enter.
Like error checking.
Well, there's no specification. If you have error checking, that's good too.
Oh, okay, yeah, because I don't know. I don't want to get points.
Having error checking does not conflict with the description of the assignment, because I did not specifically say do not error check, right? I mean, if I did, then it would not be consistent with the description. Yep.
Can you try one case where you put in a letter instead of numbers?
Okay, sure, I can do that. And let me answer your question first.
How much would be taken off if we have a running total after each entry? Is that a lot? Is that bad?
I did not explicitly say that you should not have a
Running total.
additional stuff after that. So as long as it is still consistent with the description of the assignment, I would not take points off.
Thank you.
You can print happy faces if you want. Right. Yeah. All right. So to answer your question, to print some, to do something other than numbers, right? Okay. So let's do that. So we'll specify 4 and 5 here, and then we'll just give it some gibberish here. It just says, "Give me a number." More gibberish. Oh, this time it does not do it right. Ah.
Well, isn't that because of the error checking only for putting the error once?
Yeah, after you put a number, then it does.
Remember, your error checking codes for Mondays. You don't want the error multiple times.
Okay. Okay. Hold on. Yep, that's right. Okay, but this is not the behavior that I want. Now, error checking is what I want, but the error checking is required, but the error message itself is optional. I did not specify that you have to print an error message. You just don't want it to crash or get into an infinite loop.
No, but I believe you said, like, when you use your example, ASDF 1 2 question mark 1 2. You said you did not want the error message repeating after each character.
That's only because it kind of makes sense, but the description of the homework did not say that you cannot have repeated error messages as long as it is not endless. Then it will still be okay. So, but getting back to this program, my program has a flaw now, right? Because after this, it is supposed to give me a number as also. So, and it's not doing that. So now the question is, where is the problem and how do we fix it? Now, whenever you fix problems, you start with the symptom. Okay. So the symptom is, it is supposed to give me an error message, but it did not. Okay. So we'll start with the symptom like that. So the symptom is when I'm here, we are supposed to print, give me a number. When the second time I enter something other than a number, it is supposed to give me an error that like this. Yes?
I think you have your counter initialized at the wrong spot.
No, it is at the right spot. The problem is not because of this counter. This counter, if I move the counter into this loop here, then it would defeat the whole purpose of having a counter. It's a tough problem to solve because the problem has to do with detecting a line feed character. So to reset the counter at the right time, I would have to say, oh, you know what? I can take care of all the junk without prompting anything. But when I see a line feed character, I better reset the counter. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I mean, I know what the error. I mean, I know what the problem is. But when they start asking you for numbers, you enter a letter, or doesn't matter how many, each one error message, and then it won't give you any more until you enter one number. Once you enter a number,
right,
then you start giving you.
Because that's the only time it will get out of the loop and get back to line 21, where error counter is reset to a 0. So what we need is a mechanism to reset error counter before we get back onto line 21. So, and then the next question is, how do we know when to do it? Okay, so let me go back to the command prompt here and just reanalyze what we have done here. This is the first time we enter something that is a non-number, right? And then I press the enter key. As soon as I press the enter key, scanf has something to chew on. And it says, oh, this is not a number. And then I go through the logic to chew up all the junk characters, right? as soon as I chew up all the junk characters, it's scanf says, I have nothing else to process now. Give me something to process. That is when it goes back to scanf %d at that time. That's why it prompted me to enter something again. But it did not get out of the loop, which means error counter is already 11 at that point, because it actually chew up the line feed character as one character. So because error counter is 11, and I give it this junk here, and it doesn't give me any error message because I said only give me an error message if error counter is 0. So I need to reset error counter when I see line feed characters. That's basically what I need to do. Okay, so going back to the source code here, this is the way to fix it. As soon as you scan what I have just seen here, use another conditional statement to basically say if junk is the line feed character, which is a \n, which is also ASCII code 10 in Linux, then this is a good time to reset error counter. So error counter gets reset to 0, and then we do the checking. Then it will prompt the error.
So what does 10 mean again?
10 is the ASCII code of the line feed character. \n, or when you press the enter key, it has an ASCII code of 10. And I can show you why we know that too, because according to the ASCII table, when you look at the ASCII table, when you look at entry 10, this is the new line, and does that look familiar? And it has an ASCII code of 10 in decimal. So you can actually detect all of these non-printable characters as well by comparing a character to its ASCII code. Yep.
But that's not necessary for...
No, this is definitely not necessary, but I like my programs to work
better.
the way that makes sense. Not just consistent with the homework description, but the way that makes sense. All right, so let's go ahead and do one last round and check whether the program is now fixed. So we have 6 entries and 200 as the threshold. So we'll enter some gibberish here. Give me a number. More gibberish. It's still not giving me. It's not giving me any error messages. In other words, it's not getting here, because if it did get here, then error counter would be 0, and it will print another, give me a number. Yep.
If you, instead of putting the if junk equals 10, just putting that if statement, you put error counter equals 0 after the printf statement.
After the printf statement, after this one here?
Yeah.
Then it will print it every single time. You mean resetting error counter to 0 here?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would basically reset it every single time. So error counter will be 0 to get in here, but as soon as it get in here, it will reset it back to 0. So that won't work either. Yep.
So every time you enter all those letters, it goes in the while loop for each letter, right?
You know what? I have another theory. Let's see if 13 works. 13 is the actual ASCII code of the carriage return character. So we'll check whether this works or not. And you can definitely tell that the assignment is done at this time. Okay, I'm just getting obsessive with getting this little thing to work.
I tried to do the same thing.
Nope, still not working. GDB. Okay, so we want to set a breakpoint where we are comparing junk to 13. Okay, there we go. cisp360, run the program, give it 6, 7, and then give it some junk to process. Okay, give it only 1 byte of junk to process, because otherwise it will just keep going on and on and on. Okay, there we go. So we print junk. It should be the lowercase a character or ASCII code 97. That's good. That's what we expect it to be. And then if I continue, it doesn't get back here. In other words, the carriage return character is taken up by scanf itself, and that's why it's not reported as a junk character. So there's no easy way around this problem, because I can't, because after I take one junk byte out of standard in, I'm going to reinterpret what is the input. The reinterpretation, scanf with %d, will chew up all the spaces without being considered an error. It will chew up all the line feed characters without considered an error.
I print jump after I print jump after the scanf. Just give me like a random number, like something.
Yep. So there's no easy way around this problem, unfortunately. Not using just scanf. Yep.
I had it where you ask for this scanf outside of the loop, and I would have that equal to like a character. So whereas if you put like a number, it would give you a 0 or a 1, and then based on that, then I would then that would keep track. Then if you put a number after all the characters, then it would go back to a 0 or a 1 or whatever, and then you can track it by that. You see what I'm saying?
Well, I guess when I read your code, I will definitely see what you're saying. But it's hard to just listen to the code and follow it at the same time. All right. So I have this new document here is really short about error checking and handling. The scanf approach we have done already. So we are now moving on to the cin approach. So the question now is, what if your program is supposed to use cin instead of scanf? How do you write a program using cin to get the same thing done? So to perform error checking using cin, there are 3 concepts that we have to use instead of just 2. The first concept is when you use cin in a Boolean context, it is actually indicating whether the previous read operation was successful or not. Okay, so I know that really sounds funky, but this is what it is. Okay, so let's say we have an integer I, okay, and we have some block of code here. We don't care what it is, but at some point we want to read from standard in and say, okay, interpret an integer and store that into a variable I. This is what I mean by using cin as a variable in the context where a Boolean value is expected. Okay, because I'm using cin inside the parentheses of a conditional statement. So this is one thing that C++ can do that C cannot do. Okay, because in C++ it is context sensitive, and in this particular context, because it's inside the parentheses of a conditional statement, the compiler says, okay, I need something that is Boolean here. Okay, and then what it sees is cin. Okay, now in C this would have been a problem, because how do we turn a cin into a Boolean value? But in C++ it is possible, because typecasting is actually quote unquote programmable in C++ as opposed to not programmable in regular C. So what happens is in this particular context, if cin is true, it means it did read successfully in the previous read operation, which is this one here. If cin is false, then it means it did not read something correctly. The previous read operation failed. Is that okay? Go ahead.
How would it not be true though? Wouldn't whatever you type in go into the variable I?
What if it failed? What if you type ASDF? If you type, if you type ASDF, then it cannot interpret ASDF as an integer. So trying to read an integer would fail. And when it fails, cin becomes false, basically. When you use it in Boolean context, it returns false. Row sheet. here it is. Thank you. So that's why this conditional statement, is going to work, because if cin is true, it means, we did read something into I, and this would be a good time to utilize the value of I. The else branch means we did not read a number into I, or the input is not a number, so you have to do something else, okay, for error checking. So that's the first concept. The second concept is when an integer was not read, okay, in this context, cin will lock itself in a quote-unquote error state. Okay, any additional attempt to read from standard in will not proceed, even if there is something valid in the input, like, oh, I just want to read a character this time. It's not going to work because you are not clearing the error state. So what you need to do is to use a clear method in this case, and use cin.clear to clear the error state. After you clear the error state, then you can do the same thing that we do with scanf, which is basically just to declare a character and just read and clear that one single character, and keep doing that until you can read an integer. Are we doing okay so far? Can everybody kind of map these concepts into the previous homework assignment? Approximately, like, which part is doing which part of scanf, which part is doing which part of scanf. So this part is kind of interesting, but it's not 100% necessary. For convenience and some really cryptic code, the right shift operator, which is the greater than operator, returns the stream object, which is a cin in this case, that is on the left. So that means if you want to do error checking, this code here, oops, let me go from here, this code, which has one statement to do the reading part and then a conditional statement to check whether we read something successfully, can be done with only one single conditional statement, because this expression itself is returning cin itself, but since it is inside the context where a Boolean value is expected, so it is now reporting whether it read successfully or not. So we're combining several operations into one single one. And whether you'd like to use something like this or spell it out like the previous code, it's entirely up to you. This is what I would consider somewhat cryptic, okay, and not exactly a good thing to do when you're just starting out programming. But I do want to point out, you can't do it this way because of the features of C++. So with this out of the way, it is time to turn on get onto the homework assignment. This is I have to do some editing first because I forgot to check out one part.
Is it identical or a little bit different?
It's almost. I'm changing the part that is.
That's the part.
Yes. Okay, it's exactly the reverse of the previous homework assignment. You have to use cin and cout with this one, and not to use scanf and printf. So let me just look for additional references to scanf or printf. Okay, that's good. Check for cin. Yep. Cout. Okay, I'm just double checking, making sure that the instruction is correct. Alright, so here's your next homework assignment, or the one that's starting now, and you have 1 week to work on this. I mean, you can sit on this for 6 days and probably 23 hours, and then work on it. Write a program in a folder called cinsum this time, so don't use sum, with a source file of main.cpp, blah blah blah. Everything is the same except for the part of what you can use. You are to use cin and cout in this assignment. Do not use scanf or printf. So you have to alter your program, or mine, okay? I give you 100% permission to use the code that I wrote today in this particular homework assignment. So even if you did not work on the previous homework assignment at all, you have a starting point. Okay? Nobody can say that, oh, but I don't have a starting point. This depends on the previous homework assignment. Well, you can use my code as a starting point. Okay? So the idea is, do you know how to use the cin and cout features to do the same thing as scanf and printf? That really is the objective of this assignment. Okay? Yep, go ahead.
Could you still use the while loop though?
If you don't want to use a while loop, you can change it to something else, but you can. You can use a while loop because of this. Remember what I pointed out a little bit earlier? The cryptic code, remember? The very last part of this note here, because you can use this inside the condition, that's your ticket. Right. Yep, go ahead.
You said you would rather we don't do that.
If you don't do this, then you will have to use a do while loop, because you have to do it repeatedly, but you have to do the cin first. You have to try to read it first, and then you interpret whether the previous read operation was successful or not. So it's up to you. I mean, if you want to separate it into two steps, then you have to change the control structure a little bit. If you use this way, the way that I have just highlighted, you can actually do it the same. Do it using the same structure as the original code. Any other questions?
Can you show us how that works?
Say again?
Writing a small program.
Yep, you definitely want to do that too. If you have any questions of okay, I'm not really quite sure how this works or whether it works or not, we have a lot of time left, so I can just go ahead and write a sample program to illustrate this.
Mm-hmm.
So I can just say vim cin detect error messages. So we'll go ahead and pound include IO stream in this case. And I don't even bother to change the namespace because you don't have to. It's just a convenience feature in that case. So in this case, I have an integer I, and I say if cin reading into I is true, then I say one thing. Otherwise, we say something else. That's all I'm going to do. In this case, I say cout just read a number, and we'll include the value of the number, which is I, and then we specify NL. That. And because I did not change the namespace, which means every time I use cin and cout, I have to specify this is in the standard namespace. It's just a little bit more typing. It's okay. Else, we have an error, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we have an error, then I'll just reflect that by saying,
Not the knife or
not,
number.
how come it's not lining up? Oh, cout, not out. Okay, you did not give me a number. In line, and that has to be standard and line 2. All right.
And the clearing part, seeing the clear.
Okay.
How can we include this in our code right here?
Well, okay, about the clear one, you can try to read another number at this point. Okay, so you can say, read again into I, and basically std, oops, keep forgetting std. Cout. Like that. So that means it will prompt you again to, if you don't need to clear first, this will prompt you for a second number. On the other hand, if you need to clear first, it's not going to prompt you again, and I will be some kind of uninitialized value.
Mm-hmm.
So let's give I some really kind of funky initialization first. Okay, so it's just some random number here. Okay, g++ dash o cin cpp. Okay, so we'll go ahead and give it an actual number first. 34. It says you just read 34, which is good. Okay, that's one branch that works. We'll give it a non-number ASDF, and you can see that you did not give me a number, but it didn't prompt me for the second time either, because if I do not clear the error status, it's not going to work anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So now we go back to the source code, and then we say, okay, let's clear the error first. So we say cin.clear, which clears the error status. and then we reattempt to read the number. Okay. So we G plus again, run the program again, and give it some non-number to begin with. It still doesn't want to do it.
Maybe we should include I in the parentheses. Which variable to clear?
No, this is supposed to work. And I actually tested this too. Oh, okay. Now it has the same problem as the original program because we are asked to remove a red block. We're still seeing a blue block, so I have to clear those bytes here first. So that's why you have to do it in a loop to get it to work.
Okay. But that's our job now.
Well, but I can illustrate this using a char though.
Sure.
So I can illustrate it using a char by saying char junk, and this time I'm reading into junk, which automatically reads a character instead because the type of junk is a char. It will automatically just try to read a character and not a number. Mm-hmm. So this is the kind of nice thing about cin is it's sensitive to the type that you're reading into. So this time we'll say the char is, just put junk here. Okay, is that okay?
Yeah.
All right, and let's not do the clear and see whether it will ask me or not, okay, or print anything that's sensible. Okay. So give it something that is not a number, and it says the char is some funky character. It is not lowercase a. Okay, so it did not read successfully into the character in this case. Now we fix the program and put this back in. Clear the error status first, and this time it should read in the character, and it would say we just read the character a back. So please recompile, rerun program, give it ASDF again, and this time you can see that it read the character a. So that means dot clear makes a difference, because if you do not specify dot clear, it simply won't read anything, not even a character from standard in. On the other hand, if you dot clear first, then you're ready to read the next thing. Yep.
Is there a way to have it read the first number after 2 or 3 characters?
You mean jump characters?
The way your example was Monday. ASDF 1, 2, 3.
No.
There's no way for it to pull the numbers out until it gets to 1, 2, 3.
Nope.
That's why it sucks.
That's why this is an easy homework. Because this homework is only involving mapping scanf to cin. And we just talked about how to map it. There's only one thing that scanf does not have that you have to deal with cin. And we just talked about that like 5 minutes ago. So if you're listening to the tape right now, you can roll back 5 minutes and watch that part again. So that's what we talked about today. This should not be a difficult homework assignment, because the whole thing is to compare and contrast scanf versus cin. All right. Any other questions? All right. If there are no questions, have a nice weekend. Unless you come to my office hour and ask questions. And I'll see you guys on Monday.